Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last episode of this series on how to increase visibility to unleash your Microsoft 365 potential. In this episode, we will talk about SharePoint storage, how you can manage it, how much you got, and what are some of the other interesting options out there. Let me actually start quick introduction. My name is Vlad Catrinescu. I'm a Microsoft MVP from Montreal, Canada. I'm also a Pluralsight author where I publish a lot of my training content. And I'm here joined today by a good friend of mine, Drew Madelung. How are you doing, Drew?
Good, Vlad. Let's talk to you again on last episode of the series, episode 7. Right?
Last episode
we
of the
did it. So
series.
if you guys are watching, you stuck with us. If you watched them all the way through, I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much for still being here.
And I'm Drew. So my name is Drew Madelung. I'm a Microsoft consultant, also an MVP like Vlad, longtime consultant. So my world is helping organizations deploy and manage Microsoft 365. So Vlad trains them. I go make sure that stuff that they're actually doing what they've been trained on. And we work well together. We both come from the IT pro side and storage. In prepping for this, we were actually talking about on-prem storage and how that's changed. So I think, what are we talking about today for cloud storage, Vlad?
Well, first of all, quick shout out. If ever this is the first video you check out of the series, check out all the other ones as well. And what are we talking about today? First of all, what are the basics? How do we calculate SharePoint and OneDrive for Business storage? And Drew is laughing because I switched the slides around a bit right before hitting record. So he was not expecting the slides to come out in this order. I mean, we've been presenting together so much. I got to find a way to keep him on the edge so he never knows what's next. After that, we will talk about what are the two different options to manage SharePoint Online storage. We have an automatic way and a manual way, and we'll see which one is better fit for your organization. And finally, we will talk about what are some reports we can do around our storage. So, Drew, are we ready to get started?
Let's talk about storage.
Let's talk about storage. And like you said, right before recording this, we're talking about a good, well, I still call them the good old on-prem days just because that's where I started. So I still have good memories of it. But from a storage perspective, it's a lot easier to manage in the cloud. At a high-level overview, in SharePoint Online, the storage we have will depend on how many licensed users we have inside our tenant. The more users we have licensed, the more storage we have. And if we ever hit our limit, we always have the possibility to buy more. For OneDrive for Business, well, it's a lot easier. It's unlimited individual cloud storage. There's always an asterisk because there's some requirements to have that in the back. We'll really focus on SharePoint in this course, but I still wanted to have that little asterisk there because there are some requirements. Now, in order to calculate how much storage we have in SharePoint Online, there is a formula that we need to have. We need to, first of all, know how many users we have in our tenant, and then each tenant has 1 terabyte plus 10 gigs per licensed user. So for each licensed user you have, you add 10 gigs of storage, except for field worker licenses. We've talked about field worker licenses a bit earlier in the episode series when we talked about reclaiming licenses. Those are the cheap licenses that go as low as $2 per user per month. Even if you have 1,000 field workers, those do not add those 10 gigs of storage. So what does it look like? If you have a tenant where you have 200 licensed users, you have that 1 terabyte you get started with, then you have that 10 gig times 200 licensed users, which will give you somewhere around 3 terabytes of storage. So the calculation is that easy. However, don't worry, you don't necessarily need to get out your calculator. Most of the time, what you're going to do is you're just going to go to the SharePoint Online Admin Center. and then you'll see either at the top right of the active sites or one of the cards you have on the SharePoint Admin Center home, it tells you how much storage you have available. So the info I shared before is just useful for you to know on how did they get to this number, but you don't need your calculator. Just go see, because Microsoft does it automatically for you. Drew, what's the largest number you've seen of available storage?
in the petabytes.
Wow.
So so what's interesting is when you we're talking about SharePoint, right? So glad, but when we're looking at the SharePoint storage configuration here, it's also all of the data that's hosted in Teams, right? So when you look at this, SharePoint is the back end for the file services. So when we're looking at your storage reports here, this is actually storage for all of your SharePoint Online, Microsoft Teams sites, or any other Microsoft 365 group site that use SharePoint as a service. This will also start to include your SharePoint embedded information as well. So this is going to be how much files are you able to hold in a collaborative space. OneDrive, again, is separate. So that calculation, as I want to make sure we touch on the asterisk and look at this report, it will say if I have 300 terabytes for my tenant or 3 terabytes for my tenant, my user information, all my OneDrive information, that does not count against those 3 terabytes. So each of those OneDrive site collections, each of those users will have their own amount of data that they get that is you are included within your licensing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So that does not count towards those 3 terabytes. What's been interesting in watching the growth of storage here with Teams has been 2 main things I've seen. One has been the proliferation of recordings of Teams meetings. That has started to, those meetings are all recorded in SharePoint, right? That's actually going to, if you watch your storage, it's an important one to watch, that when you turn on meetings recordings, if you enable that across the board, that these will start to go up. Right. And the other one has been Stream. So the conversion of Stream from Stream Classic into Stream on SharePoint, that's actually going to start to consume this information as well. So when you're watching these reports,
Stream had a separate storage, right? We had like, I think 50 or 500 gigs that were for free, and then Stream had its own storage. But now that it's on SharePoint, all of it gets added towards our SharePoint quota.
So those get added, but anything that's hosted out in OneDrive does not. So and when you're thinking about this storage report and that calculation, and you need to make sure you manage anything that is going to be within SharePoint Teams, in the file services there. I get caught on this a lot with doing migrations, right? So if you're doing an M&A activity, or you're prepared, a lot of M&As would be what I see is making sure you have enough space available to that. Or if you're doing an on-premises migration and you're a smaller organization, make sure you look at how much data you have in SharePoint prior, because it will come out and start to use a lot of storage. I mean, storage is definitely, I've seen, start to proliferate more frequently as we go. If you look at some of the stats, that it's kind of bewildering. It's in the petabytes of data that are being added into a Microsoft 365 like every day or month. I mean, it's something astronomical. And what that means is that the storage you have today, I have not seen many customers or clients have an issue with this yet, but it's starting to happen more frequently as people are using the cloud and using Microsoft 365 for everything. So you might not think this, if you're watching this, you might be like, oh, I'm okay. Just wait. It's coming. It will happen. If it hasn't hit your tenant yet, I'm watching the tenants I'm working with, they're creeping up at a bell curve. So whichever way I'm facing the camera, this way, right? They're going up. And so this graph is going down, but it's going to flip. And I know, Vlad, you've seen things too. It's been interesting watching how much more data we're bringing into Microsoft 365. And
see, Drew, I'm from Canada, so I call it the hockey stick, in a hockey stick shape. But I know you guys are not as good as hockey down there, but we won't talk about that. And if ever, I think I mentioned it before, but if ever you hit the tenant limit, you can purchase more storage. It's not the cheapest thing ever, just because it's hot storage, but you can purchase more storage if needed. But Microsoft actually recently announced, we don't have it yet, it's not available yet, but they will also have an archiving solution that allows you to put, especially if you have sites content that you want to keep for whatever reason, but not have them always accessible, you can have sites in cold storage that pay a lot less. And you can actually start using archiving as soon as it's available for free if you're not at your storage quota yet, at least for now. We know licensing can change. I do not guarantee that it will be free, but from what I understood, those are the plans as of now. That I mean, right? Drew, licensing can always change. We don't know
when
SharePoint Premium licensing yet.
you said that, and I'm thinking like I'm going to come back to this video in like 6 months and be like, we were wrong. So you might see an episode,
asterisk. It might change in the future,
we
but
might have an episode 8, which is recapping everything we redid that's changed from episodes 1 through 7. Yeah, archive is going to be good. I think it's make sure you understand what archive is and what it means. So Vlad's using the term hot and cold storage. That's going to be the time or the latency to get to that data. So from a back-end standpoint, we're able to put data in, think of it almost like as an SSD or like flash storage if you want to go at the basic level, and you have like a USB drive. Just easier way to read that data. And Microsoft's giving us the option to say, we don't always need data to be readily available for us. Let's put it somewhere else on the side. And if we want to get it later, we can, and we'll just pay for that on the side. So as your tenant keeps growing, that will be one of the core options we get to manage it, but it doesn't solve like cleanup, right? You can look at this report, it doesn't solve data. It doesn't solve the hockey stick, right? The hockey stick still exists. So there's ways we can start to control that, right, Vlad? I mean, within.
I love that I converted you to the hockey stick now.
Use it now. Hockey stick storage.
But there are other limitations you need to know, especially for SharePoint Online storage. 25 terabyte storage per site. So one SharePoint site or site collection, for those of you that come from on-prem, can have a max of 25 terabytes. We can have up to 2 million sites per organization, which is a huge number. But now that private channels and SharePoint and shared channels and teams get their own SharePoint site, the number of sites inside an organization also started to have that hockey stick shape because of all the channels that are created with teams. Isn't it crazy to think, Drew, that on-prem we wanted to limit content databases for a site to 200 gigs?
And that was
now,
yeah.
And now we can upload one single file that's 250 gigs. I don't even know if that would have worked on-prem to have one file 250 gigs.
No,
we would have broken SharePoint and SQL at the same time.
Can you imagine the SQL backup the next day? And then trying to flush out and do a restore in that SQL DB to like another farm? No.
That would not be fun. But now with the cloud, don't need to worry about those anymore. You can upload a single file up to 250 gigs. And you will still have a pretty low limit, but it makes sense. 250 megs, the limit for a file attached to a SharePoint list item. Okay, so now that we know about the theory, about the basics, how do we manage the storage? We actually have two different strategies. The first one is automatic. This is the one that I use in my demo tenants and, well, in my production tenant as well, because I'm an independent consultant. So there's only so much space I can consume by myself, which is you basically tell each site can take as much space as it needs. We won't put a limit per site. It will be each site can take as much as it needs, of course, up to the limit of 25 terabytes. And the idea is that you report and track usage and be proactive on if one site is getting out of control. Because if not, of course, a couple of sites going up to 25 terabytes can eat up the storage of your whole tenant. The other option is manual. So basically, you decide what is the storage limit for each single SharePoint site in your organization. Where do we configure that? Inside the SharePoint Admin Center. So if we go to settings, we have our site storage limit. We can have the choice to either automatic or manual. And if you pick manual, you can then go for each site and choose what is the max storage for this specific site and at what percentage of usage do we send an email to site owners saying, hey, you're almost at the max of your site. it might be a good idea to reach out to your admin to get it increased. So let me talk about it. Let me show it to you. Back in the SharePoint Online Admin Center here, and let me go to settings here on the left. And then the option I have here are site storage limit. I can either set it to automatic, and what this will do, it will set the individual site limit for each site to 25 terabytes. That's what it will do. It will set it to the max and then no other specific restrictions. Or I can set it to manual where I set specific limits for each site. If we have it in automatic, it's pretty easy. You just have to make sure you keep an eye on it. But if you have it on manual, then when you create a site or you go to your existing sites, you go under storage here, and then you can choose what is the maximum storage for this site. I can say it's 100 gig, but email owners when it has reached 90% of that. This way, if we're at 90 gigs in this case, site owners will get an email and then they can forward it to the admin or open a help desk ticket, and we can have a conversation. How have you reached 90 gigs? Is it a good business requirement, or are you putting stuff there that shouldn't be there? And if it all has a good business justification, we are going to raise the limit. Something else that I wanted to show you, first of all, you see here at the top on active sites, I can see that I have 1.29 terabytes available out of 1.29 terabytes. So that's the first location where you can see the total space. We call it the pooled storage that you have in your tenant. And the other option is one of the cards on the homepage here. You have one for SharePoint storage usage. Right now, like Drew said, it's rare that you see it go down, but that's just because this is a demo tenant. So I create stuff, I delete stuff. So sometimes it goes down when I delete certain sites. In most organization, it will have that hockey stick or at least growth trending line. And they also have some nice message here. Hey, you have plenty of storage for now. If you continue using storage at the same rate, you'll have enough for 6 months or more. I haven't yet met a client where this message is different. Drew, have you seen any where this message is like, hey, you have to do something now or you'll run out of storage?
It doesn't, it just changes really color. I don't remember the exact language, but you can get close. Yeah, it's not, what I struggle with is this is not a great identifier, right? I think you see the hockey stick, but it's all it does is make you you need to click on the button below it, right? So the button below it that says view largest sites, that's I know where we're going. Like the graph takes you into the reporting that we have takes you into the per site level. And this is where we need to go into. Once you see it, it's simply this is where we come in and what do we want to do with this content? So you'll start to come in and see, I know one I worked on most recently came in and we had one site that was sitting at like 19 and a half, almost 20 terabytes. Their tenant was a pretty small one. It was one that, great, we saw what they were doing. There's some transactional processes in there. We talked about how it was working. It's fine, but it becomes very manual then after this point. This gives us information on what we need to do, but there is not a way then to go in and do anything with like the landing of the rack demo site here to go do something. We have to go find the owner, go talk to them, go look at the site, go figure out what's actually happening, go look at what's actually causing it. You've seen some really fun ones where you have someone that might have 1 million list items in a list because of someone left a workflow that ran for a long time. 100% true. Like I remember I blew one up because I tried to hit a site collection of 25 terabytes and forgot to delete it in a tenant. So there's things that basically the point is you have to go back down per site after you use the graphing, the graph that you have on the SharePoint page to go all per site.
Yeah, and then we don't have, like you said, we don't really have the reports built in to tell us within the site. Then we have to attack them individually.
One of the things that you will see is as it's coming is some of the inactivity. So my recommendation as you start to go into these storage reports is you're going to look at those activity data around them. And that should be one of your triggers or key information that you'll use for content cleanup. There's a lot of rot that exists in SharePoint, especially if you did a migration from either a file share or SharePoint on premises or like an open text, like doing rot cleanups or redundant, old or trivial data prior will help ease the pain versus moving garbage from one spot to the other. So whether you use a rot cleanup or do a type of data discovery and cleanup in the cloud or do a data cleanup on premises, all of that will help manage your storage that's not really built, that's definitely not built into the product, built into Microsoft 365. Those things we need to do as a administrator or site owner or someone watching this stream here.
And of course, you don't only have the user interface. We also have our best friend as M365 admins, which is PowerShell, where you're able, especially if you set it up in manual, you're able to create nice reports to see what is happening inside your tenant, what sites are reaching the max quota, create the filters you want, save the data in CSV in a SQL database, create your own Power BI reports. So PowerShell can be a great tool for you to create reports on all of this. But this is about it for storage in SharePoint Online. Before we're done, also wanted to mention that there are tools out there that can truly help you have more visibility inside the storage in your organization, such as Syskit, which is the sponsor of this video that brought me and Drew together to create this wonderful series of 7 episodes. Make sure you check them out. They have a 21-day free trial on their website. You can go discover where is storage used, is it in SharePoint, Teams, and it really gives you a lot more flexibility on the storage inside your tenant. On this, Drew, I think this is the end of our 7 episode series. Thank you so much for everyone that watched it all. We truly hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as me and Drew enjoyed hanging out together and talking about stuff that we both love, which is Microsoft 365. Drew, any parting thoughts?
If you're watching this one as the last one or your first one, make sure you do go look at the other ones in the series. These do correlate to each other. We think this series was put together to really make sure you know what you can do as an IT administrator inside of Microsoft 365, which is where Vlad and myself come from. So whether you might think you know it, we threw a lot of our own personal information and feedback around each of the sessions that we went through here. So whether this is your second, your first, or future last, thank you. If not, please review the rest. And we can be contacted through different social media networks.
LinkedIn, you can find us on almost every social media out there, and we would love to connect.
Thank you.